I would encourage pastors to, I mean, there's days you got to speak to the men in your church, but I do think you very intentionally need to speak to women in your church and in front of men, validate women.
Pastor Jim, you've been going back to the pastoral ministry for about a year, and you transitioned from the national leadership as a general secretary.
Right, yeah.
So
I was in the general secretary office for 10 years, almost 10 years, and then made that transition back into local church ministry this past year.
Well, that is a big transition. So how has it been so far? What's your journey like?
Oh, it's been really, actually, an immense amount of fun. I do have to say, I wouldn't have traded the last 10 years of my life for anything. The opportunity to work with Dr. Wood for nearly 9 years and Doug Clay for nearly 1 year. Well, I mean, I wouldn't have traded that for anything. I still miss some of the people, although the church I pastor is right next door to the Assemblies of God headquarters, so I do have a number of them in the congregation I serve, but I miss working with that team. It was an incredibly stretching, great experience, those 10 years. But I love the local church, and you know, I'm shocked this happened. I wasn't planning on going back to pastor.
Oh, really?
So I was shocked that the door even opened at Central Assembly. And then I was amazed at how clearly I felt the leading of the Holy Spirit to walk through this door and say yes to this. And then I've never gone back and pastored a church I used to, because I'd pastored Central for nearly 5.5 years. And then I went to work with Dr. Wood in the general secretary position. So going back to the same church has been amazing. But so I consider this all my latest step of faith.
That is great.
But it's been really an exciting experience.
Wow, what a shift, right?
Yeah.
And your church is really known as a flagship church for the Assemblies of God, and at least in the Springfield area, everybody knows Central Assembly, and you have brought forth some amazing transformation. And I know that people missed you for that 10 years that you were gone. So that's good. So, but it's a very different dynamics, right? Pastoring a local church at one level is just completely different from pastoring the church, capital C, at the national level. But I also believe there could be some similarities. So tell us about that. What are some similarities and differences that you see at the church leadership level and the national leadership level?
In national leadership, you don't have like one congregation, so you get used to. Most of us in the executive offices would travel half the time and represent the general council of the Assemblies of God to our districts and preach in churches, local churches a lot. And it's the life of being a guest speaker. It's the life of perpetuating a message that kind of helps move a movement forward. And it's a very administrative role, especially in the general secretary role. Oversaw credentialing of ministers and the charting of churches and keeping all the official records and everything. So it fit, all my background is in engineering. That was my education. So it fit that. I mean, on an average day, I had a lot of measurable, specific things to problem solve, and you kind of knew when you were done. Now, in this role, it's less administrative. It's less, I had a great staff, but that was more team management rather than spiritual leadership. Now I've re-immersed, pastoring is very much spiritual leadership, and it's a much more reflective role. I usually speak twice a week. It's new preparation twice a week for the congregation. And so I find it's not quantifiable, task-oriented anymore. It's not trying to think about a whole movement. It's really focusing on one local flock. And really, I really tried to listen to the Holy Spirit a lot when I was General Secretary and how to run administrative systems. But this is different. This is carrying people on your heart, one flock, and constantly trying to listen to the Holy Spirit about how to feed them and how to give spiritual leadership.
You were saying that as a national leader, you had the life of a guest speaker.
Yeah.
So how was it? Did you have a home church? Because you travel so much. So when you were coming home, physical home, and and you have to go to your spiritual home and mingle with the family and grow together, but it's difficult to do that.
It is.
So how was it for you?
Pastor Jeff, who followed me, asked me if I do his installation, and then he sort of publicly invited Sandy and I to come back to Central. And so in nearly a year and a half, I'd been general secretary by that point, and he asked us to come back to Central and make that their home church, and I really wanted to support him, so I did that. So I'd come in and just sit in the balcony, and it's a different experience when you pastor a church and you just come and sit in the balcony and watch somebody else do it. I love Pastor Jeff, and he was so kind to us. But with all the traveling and speaking, sometimes I'd honestly only be there one Sunday every 2 months. I used to tell Pastor Jeff I'm the worst church member he ever had.
And he still wanted you. That's good.
Yeah, but it was still kind. And so that became our church family. Again, I just tried to keep a real low profile. But so people tell me I'm a little different now, having gone back. And they say, you're better at what you do than you used to be. Sometimes they'll quantify that, sometimes they won't. But I do know the last 10 years really stretched me. Yeah. Also, I think I just lean on, honestly, I find myself just desperate for God. I don't know how to do this, really. You know, and the longer I serve as a pastor, the more simple I become, just back to basics. And I really need the Holy Spirit. When I first stepped into Central, I said, Lord, I don't know I can do this. Because I was doing general secretary full-time, too, for the first year and a half of that process. And I don't know I can do this. And I felt like the Holy Spirit said, if you'll just leave me room, I'll carry this for you. If you'll give my spirit space, I'll carry this for you. So I do a lot more altar calls than I ever did before. We just make time in our services to wait on God, to corporately pray. And I'm just trying to, I still work hard, but I used to try too hard. And I think the last 10 years in the general secretary role kind of filed that edge off of my life of just trying too hard to make things happen because it was such different kind of work. But I just am still trying to lean on the Holy Spirit more. Just let Him do it. So I work hard, but I'm trying not to try too hard, to get in the flesh. I used to try too hard to make things happen. Now I'm just trying to just give space to the Holy Spirit, invite people to the life of the Spirit. And I'm actually seeing people respond more.
That is good.
As a result.
So through your role, like you said, you travel many different churches across the nation, even overseas. Mm-hmm. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the majority of the churches in America are serving under 100 or less people. So that is a majority of the churches today. And yet you look at the resources that are provided in our generation, whether for leadership or church development, it kind of gears toward going big is the main idea. Yeah. If you're not growing in number in terms of anything that is measurably in the physical realm, and then you're not healthy. What are some of your observations, not having gone through many different churches? You have a broader perspective. Yeah. What defines a healthy church, and is being small unhealthy? It's
not unhealthy at all. I pastored a ministry where there's just me and 2 others when I was a university student. Then we had a spiritual breakthrough, and we went to pretty fast to 65. Wow. And over the next couple of years to 100. And then later that university ministry, the University of Minnesota became a university church. We started with 120. But that whole process from 3 to 120 over several years, I mean, the reason we could do that is because there was nothing at 3 of us, at 25 of us, at 50 of us, there was nothing that stopped us from being a healthy church. I noticed Doug Clay, our superintendent now, is characterizing healthy churches in 3 ways. Number 1, they're biblically engaged, Bible engagement. Number 2, spirit empowerment. And number 3, we're missionally active. And you know what? We were that when we had 25 of us. There's nothing stopping you from being that. I just think the mentality is what you have to be careful of. I mean, if you're in a small community, you probably can't be a mega church, because there's not enough people in the community to make that happen. But you can't, on the other hand, keep thinking small church, because then you start thinking limited resources and there's only so much we can do. I think instead of thinking small church, you think big impact. And obviously we can't do everything under the sun. We only have 65 people on a weekend, but you can still really have an impact in the community, and it's amazing. I know one pastor who he feels his call is to small churches, and he just looked for the gathering place in his community, It's just a small community I'd never heard of. But he decided, probably because of sports and civic events and things, a high school was the gathering point. And so he got a job as a bus driver for high school kids. And he just got into the high school and got involved in all the activities there. And that's where the whole community, I love our small church pastors. They are relational geniuses. They're really something, you know. And I also think, you know, you earn your stripes. It shapes a lot of good things in you if you start by pastoring something small, because you have to do everything hands-on.
That's true.
And then that affects, then you know what it takes, and that affects in a larger church the way you manage other staff.
I think it also strengthens our perspective. Just like you were sitting at Central Assembly as an attendee, not as a pastor, you have a different perspective.
Different perspective.
Yeah, and as a small congregation pastor, you do a lot of things, and then you understand, okay, my people go through this,
exactly.
and he can serve or she can serve better.
Yeah.
I can see that you're enjoying this season now.
I really am,
Yeah.
I'm surprised of this season, but I'm loving it, yeah.
And I love it too, watching you being a champion for female ministers as well. And I know that just recently you have onboarded a wonderful minister on your team. So tell us about that person.
Not that she has much spare time, but Crystal Martin, who she and her husband lead our Chi Alpha ministry, a massive student movement all across our country, and of course the network of women ministers for the Assemblies of God. She directs that, and I know, personal dear friend, you do a lot of work with her. And Pastor Crystal, I've hired on a part-time basis as an associate pastor at Central, and she has added so much value. I get nervous. To quote a friend of mine, I get nervous when our team does not have females at the table, and there are too many pastoral teams that are all male, and I just do not want to go. And I've just been praying. I've just been elected at Central permanently, and I was praying. I said, God, I need female pastors here helping me. I can't do this with a bunch of guys. And within the next few weeks, the door opened and Crystal expressed willingness to come on, and if that would work. And so we have a wonderful working partnership. Also, you know, my stepping away from general secretary position did open the door. I told Doug I wouldn't step away till he was ready to appoint somebody. But when he started talking to me about Donna, I immediately shot him my resignation letter. And it makes me feel good that stepping away from that role allowed us to hire the first female executive officer in the Assemblies of God. And it was also, when I was general secretary, some of our first district officers were district secretaries, and they were female. And I just love being a part of all that.
That is so wonderful. To hear you say stepping down is also a great expression of leadership. Because we don't think of it in that term. Stepping down means, oh, you're being passive, or you don't have nothing to offer. Right. But instead you say, okay, stepping down is actually better for the greater body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
That's how I did honestly look at it that way. I mean, the very bottom line was I felt like God asked me to lay aside the national position to care for a local church and that he loved. And but I was thrilled that it could make way for other people to step into that role, especially a female.
Yeah, and she's such an inspiration for female ministers, and you are also an inspiration to us because you are creating that space for gifted leaders to rise up, whether it's a male or female, gifted, called people to rise up, and you just did that. So for those of us that are wanting to do what you're doing so well, championing women and ministers with potential and calling, how can they do this well?
I would encourage pastors to, I mean, there's days you got to speak to the men in your church, but I do think you very intentionally need to speak to women in your church, and in front of men, validate women. I did a message in Mother's Day a year and a half ago, where it was a simple biblical view of women and their equality in life, their equality in ministry. And I tried to address some of the things in our culture, whether it be the Me Too movement or other things that are really, are in pornography and other things that are really dehumanizing and debasing females in our culture. And you know, I was surprised how many people said to me at the end of that, "I've never heard a man say that."
Wow.
And I'm going,
Wow.
"Oh, this is just obvious
Like
Bible."
affirming women, or
yeah,
what?
affirming women. Yeah.
Wow. As a lead
And
pastor.
as a lead pastor, yeah. And so I was surprised how many people said that to me. So I just think we take opportunity to affirm women in their role. Jesus really, compared to how the culture looked at women, Jesus like radically elevated the status of women. And so it's easy, it should be easy for us to do that as well.
Wow, it should be, but it really isn't. But you make it look easy, and you do it very gracefully. So thank you. Well, I am so honored to just sit with you today and just chat with you and hearing your passion. And you're glowing. You're glowing with joy.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, unusual season for Sandy, my wife and I. It's great to see you, Sehi. Always admire what you're doing here. We're pastoring together in the same city and trying to reach this city. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. I love what you're doing too. We're going to be here for each other and for God and building this kingdom together. So thank you for your time, and we'll talk later.
Okay, that'd be wonderful.
God
Thanks.
bless you.